Elizabeth.
Hi, how are you?
I'm excellent. How are you today?
Great, thank you.
Great to meet you.
You too. I listened to a bunch of your episodes. They're great. I love them.
Oh, cool. Thank you so much. I appreciate
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Sometimes I feel like I'm hurtling through all of this in a vacuum. So it's great to hear.
No. It was really engaging and interesting. I think your format's cool.
Thank
So
you. And
thanks for having me.
yeah, no, and I love what you're doing. I think lawyers, that mentality, it's like you're the jack of all trades. You have to know all of these things about being a human being on this planet. It fascinates me.
Right.
You do.
Yeah.
I mean, because you can't be like a clerk at a store where they come up and they're like, "Hey, do you know where the pliers are?" And they're like, "I don't know." I mean, and then
Yeah,
they just walk
you're
away.
exact. You always have to know.
You have to know everything. You're like, "Yeah, no. Not only do I know where the pliers are, I know where the needle nose are. What do you want?" You know? And did it do the wrong thing? Did it do the right thing?
Exactly.
No. It's
You get it.
it's interesting. So, where are you located?
I'm in Tucson, Arizona. I
Okay.
hail from the East Coast originally, Virginia, DC area, but I moved here 20 years ago now. So yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. So you clearly like it out there.
Love
That
it. Love
okay.
it. Love it.
I love all the art and the vibe and the sunshine on Park Cat. So that part of the world, when I get there, I'm like,
Yeah.
I've arrived.
Yeah, exactly. Big blue skies. And,
Yeah,
it's a little hot at the moment, but honestly, it's hot everywhere right now. So, but, we don't have any humidity. We don't have any bugs, and we have a gorgeous mountain in our backyard. So I really can't complain.
that's perfect. Absolutely perfect. Yeah, I'm in Kansas City, Missouri. So
Yeah.
yeah, our summers get kind of wild with all the
A little
humidity and
sticky.
all that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but this is it's a fun town. I think people kind of pigeonhole us sometimes into being a cow town, but there's a lot of
Yeah.
arts, there's a lot of culture, and of course people know about
Oh,
Mahomes and all of that, but that
sure.
doesn't hurt. So,
No,
yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think people see Tucson sometimes if they've never been, they think like, what is that place? It's like some dusty place with, you know, horses and but
Yeah,
I mean it's a cool town. So I'm sure I love these smaller cities that have a lot going on and great local culture. And so
absolutely.
I'll have to come check it out.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I got to get back down into that part of the world. 2 years ago, I drove from Colorado down to San Diego, so I went through that area.
Oh, sure.
And
Yeah.
when you come from Kansas City and there's no mountains or ocean, all of that is eye candy. It's
Oh, I
wondrous.
know. I
Yeah.
know. Totally.
Yeah, it's good. But let's get into your work. And before we do, I'm getting to a point where I don't want to talk about COVID anymore, but I think it's a
Mhm.
very huge tapestry that was laid over our existence and woke
Yep.
a lot of things up. How did you get through that 4 year period, so to speak? And how did it change the way that you do things now?
Yeah, great question because it changed everything. I mean, literally everything. You may have gathered from my introductory material. So I am a practicing lawyer.
Uh-huh.
I'm an author. I do these in-person sort of programs with retiring lawyers to help them plan their futures, which is what my book's about. So all these pieces were alive and well, and then COVID hit and everything changed. So it caused me to leave the firm I was working at and start my own firm, which I, by necessity, started as a virtual firm and have continued 4 years later very successfully to remain a full virtual firm with 5 lawyers. And then, of course, we had to pivot and create virtual and online programming material in the retirement space that's been extremely successful and beneficial to a much broader group of people. So I guess like lots of crises, sometimes they present opportunities if you can catch your breath and see them.
Yeah.
And like it was terrifying at first, like it was for everybody, because you feel like everything's gonna go to zero, right? But
Yeah.
you get your feet under you. So yeah, it was
Okay.
really actually a catapult for a lot of really positive new directions.
So, with all of these new directions, if we boil down exactly what you do right now in 2024 to make it digestible and understandable, I'm going to put you in a grade school. There's
Yeah.
second or third graders, okay? And one of them is curious and says, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" What's your answer?
If I were going to unify the theme across being a lawyer and a coach and a advisor to people as they approach retirement, I would say this sentence. I help people figure out what they want and then how to go get it.
Okay. Which all of us need. And we really do. I mean, it's like we've gotten to a point, I think, in our lives where coaching is so key. I heard there was somebody in coaching that told me one time, think about all these athletes that we revere, and every single one of them has a coach. Just
Yeah.
think about all of these highly, whether it's Oprah Winfrey
Yep.
or it's other people, they all have someone that's behind the scenes that's trying their best to objectively look at this life that the sketch they're making and saying, well, what about doing this and that, and
Exactly.
you know, and figuring
Exactly.
it out. Yeah.
Yep.
So take me back to where you're from up east. Tell me how these seeds of law became who you are. But before that, when
Mhm.
you were in that seat in the third grade, what did you want to be when you grew up? What was your dream?
Oh my gosh. So as a little kid, I wanted to be a veterinarian and I wanted to be that for a long time. I mean, I adore animals and I always, I joke about myself. I was always a little high achiever. So I always wanted to do something really hard
Yeah.
that was helpful, to others, but was my target. Of course, then I get to college and I go through a tour of the chemistry department and I'm like, no. So I pivot, I ended up, pursuing an economics degree and over that period, really realizing that law was, an interesting avenue because it's really about human behavior, honestly, just the way economics is. And that all really intrigued me. So anyway, pursued law school and really I loved it and still do. You said this right at the beginning, but being a lawyer, and I'm a transactional and corporate lawyer, so I work with people to achieve their business goals. So much of it is really understanding the human beings involved, right?
Right.
As much as it is understanding the way the law works. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I think about Malcolm Gladwell, and I remember one time he coined himself as being a social psychologist. And I
yeah,
think that's kind of the way that the lawyers that are out there, because there is so much. And you mentioned, you picked something that you were going to pick something that was hard, being a veterinarian, but being a lawyer is just really, really hard. I mean, because the laws are always changing.
yeah.
And especially in this digital age, there's so many levels of things that daily are going through changes.
Exactly. It is. It is. It's always challenging and always interesting. There's always something you can learn. And when you're working with businesses, not in litigation in court, but when you're working with them to build their companies, raise money, or complete a merger and acquisition deal, or whatever it is, you're really in the business with them. I mean, and
Yeah.
so it's always engaging and interesting. It's always challenging. It never. Gets boring,
Right.
So yeah, I think I just eat that sort of challenge like an energy bar. It's just
Yeah.
kind of what fuels me. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just finished a book about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and I was thinking about the legal world and what she went through, and
Yeah.
just even what she was explaining. It was getting really heady a few times, and I had to really just, because I listened to it while I'm driving, and I really had to focus in. And there's
Yeah.
just so many ways that you can interpret the law, and there's so many ways that it can be argued, and then there's so many ways that it can be perceived and interpreted by a judge, and then you have all these people that are in the jury box. There's just a myriad of avenues, and it's just fascinating how we finally arrive at this one decision,
Right.
because
Right. Absolutely. Well, there are many, many, sort of stakeholders that have to be influenced, even in transactional settings. You've got to, work with the human mind and work with perceptions, whether you're in court or you're in a boardroom, it's all pretty intensely focused on people. And I think that's what sometimes when people get into law and they really just want to learn the law, sure you can do that, but you're not probably going to love the practice as much as those of us who like the people part, because that's inevitably part of it.
yeah, absolutely. So let me ask you this: who's been a hero for you? You're obviously very highly driven. Who has that hero been for you?
That's a great question. My mother is who I'd name. She got out of college, back in the 60s with a sort of double major in math and physics. And she went to work at the Pentagon for 9 months before she dropped her career to get married and have, wonderful me and my brother. But then she got divorced 10 years later, had no career, had to go start from scratch. And this is why I admire her. She went back to her alma mater university. She got a job as a part-time bookkeeper. And by the time she finished her career, she was the president of that university. And she's just pure hard work and determination. And she didn't let a single thing stop her from reaching her potential. And that was just really inspiring to me.
So, if you could meet one person alive on the planet right now that you find absolutely fascinating, who would that be?
Oh, wow. Um, I'm sure there are lots of good answers to this, but the first name that popped into my head was Tim Ferriss. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but I
Yeah,
love his podcast. I've been listening to it for years. I've
yeah.
read his books, and I just find him fascinating. I think he approaches the world with a very curious mind, and he's always interested in new challenges, and he's always open to learning. And I just think he'd be a fascinating guy to hang out with.
So let me ask you this, in your career, you've had to learn so much. There's so much growth that would go into what you're doing. What was one of the more monumental cases or a year in your life or something that happened where it was just an extreme amount of growth for you?
Wow. Okay. I think it was making the decision to start my own law firm. I did that in the middle of COVID. I had a number of clients that were probably going to follow me, but I didn't know that for sure. You never know for sure. You've got to take the leap and
Mhm.
then hope that you read the tea leaves correctly. And so I was always confident in my ability to practice law and get good results for my clients, but it was a new challenge to actually open and run a law firm successfully. There's a lot to it. And, that was an enormous sort of, I don't know, leap of faith and then growth experience. And now 4 years later, it's so rewarding and I just love it. I absolutely love having my own law firm. So I think that, it's a combination of stepping into an entrepreneurial, space as a lawyer and then actually successfully building it to where it is today.
But it's that whole human principle of pleasure and pain. You got to go through this unknown, this uncertainty, because once you get to that point where you're like, I did this, I set this up, I relied on myself and stepped out, that just makes it that much sweeter.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I talk about that even with people on the verge of retirement. I'm like, look, you are right on the edge of this huge inflection point, and you are going to have to leave your comfort zone. Like everything you still want is outside of your comfort zone, or you'd have it already. And that's kind of where I was. And so I think you've both got to have the courage to step out of your comfort zone and not be sensing mastery while you do that, recognizing you're going to catch up eventually, you'll get there. Yeah, and I think every time I've pushed the edges of my comfort zone and taken that leap, it's rewarded me. It's not always comfortable and easy, but you just got to hang in there.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing about coaching people that are getting into retirement is that the thing that gets me about retirement is that you've spent your whole life doing this thing, whether it's one thing or you diversify, because we all have different careers that kind of go out, but you're
Right.
always busy, you're always doing things. And then when you get to that point where it's all supposed to slow down and you got to recalibrate your reality after decades of training yourself, that's just all of a sudden an inherently tough thing. And then you factor in finances, survival, insurance, all of those things that you don't factor in when an
Yep.
employer takes care of you. So it has to be quite tumultuous.
Oh, it is so jarring for people, especially people who see themselves as, high achiever types. They still want to be, useful in the world and engaged. And I mean, first of all, you've got to bridge your identity into some new spaces, which is just existentially challenging always. You've
Yeah.
got to restructure your whole life. You've got to recognize there are new ways to bring your skills forward. It's a pretty jarring inflection point. And the thing that's tough is we're really only acclimated by our culture to save our money, right? Like that's all we're told to do. I mean,
Yeah.
so we just spend our 3-4 decades saving money, and we imagine when we get there the money is going to be the thing that gives us the peace of mind we want. And when everyone arrives at that moment, what they realize is, wait a minute, that is not the whole story at all. And now what? Everybody around me is wondering why I'm not popping the cork out of the champagne over this.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Right. And plus, when you get to that point in your life, you realize the sun's setting. You don't have a
Yeah.
lot of time. So
Right.
you better get busy doing it. So as far as you being in your career and helping people go navigate this retirement period, do you ever look and say, "Man, I can't wait till I retire"? What's your mentality on retirement?
Oh, that's a great question. What I usually work with my clients to imagine for themselves is almost like a mosaic of connected, energizing engagements and activities. Some of them are probably going to be health, and some are going to be about their relationships, and some are going to be maybe threads of their professional world or some new projects they've always wanted to engage in. So I see it. I don't see retirement as like a life of pure leisure. Like that gets very boring very fast.
Yeah.
And I think we'll all go off a cliff if we don't have fresh things to learn and fresh challenges to have. So when I think of mine, I don't really think of that word implying that I'm going to do nothing. I think of it as I'm going to choose more and more and more and more how I invest my time and energy
Yeah.
every day so that, I continue to live days that I'm choosing, I'm in the driver's seat of, and that I'm enjoying and
Yeah.
finding enriching. And when I'm not finding it enriching, I'll make a change, and it's going to be me who does it instead of an external input.
Well said, because I think that's it. It's really about the
Yes,
freedom to do what you want to do instead of feeling like you have this obligatory level of having to do
exactly.
things because, that's what we're
Yeah.
supposed to do as grown people.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
all of these things that you've done and accomplished in your life, what are you the proudest of ultimately?
Wow. Well, I guess if I zoom out, I mean, I'm a mom. I've got 4 kids. I'm probably the proudest of that, to be
Yeah.
honest with you. But if I stick to my professional life, I guess I'm proudest of probably my law firm,
Yeah.
honestly, because I did that largely by myself. And now I've got a lot of help, but it was it was a hard climb. And I look back and think, wow, you know, so yeah, I'm probably like most proud of that as I sit here in this moment. I'm pretty proud I wrote a book too, but that's still yet to be released. And, it was a huge project, but I had so much fun with it that I have to say, it wasn't the same slog in a way. It was more like, wow, check this out. I'm writing a book,
Yeah.
we'll
But
see
it's
where it
hard.
goes.
But it's hard though. It's hard to write a book. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many levels that go into it, but
Yeah.
just on a cellular level, I mean, you have to go through the revisions and the
Yes.
ideas and the flow. So talk to me about your book. Give me a preview.
Yeah, well, what happened with that is after 15 years of doing this retirement work with sort of intense professionals, I had so many people. Every time it came up in conversation, they would say to me, I know 10 people who need to talk to you, because I would just start talking a little bit about some of the ideas and principles and psychology that I've sort of learned about doing this work. And so it occurred to me that I really did have a body of work to share with the world about this that was different than maybe every other retirement book out there. And so I just thought to myself, I'm just going to start trying to get this out of my head and into some organized structure. And you're right, it was really hard. I mean, the very beginning was the hardest, but once you dump it all out and then you start organizing it, eventually it starts to take shape and you realize you actually have something. And then you also have to get comfortable that there are phases where you're not productive on the project. I mean, I learned that, and somebody said to me, well, look, no flowers in bloom for 4 seasons, right? You need a period of recovery. You can't just constantly create. And I thought, oh, you're right. So it was learning that progress sometimes means setting it down too.
Yeah.
So when people say it took 3 or 4 years to write a book, I'm like, yeah, that's right. It does, honestly.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about retirement, and by the time you get to that age of your life, there's a lot of wisdom and a lot of mileage on your odometer. But let's say you have a dream tonight. You run into the 18-year-old version of you, and you could give that young version of you a piece of advice based on what you've lived, the wisdom you've gained. What advice would you give, and would that version of you listen?
Oh, wow. Okay. I can tell you right now, I would go back to that person and say, don't worry so much. Life is always right. You may not understand why this thing is unfolding right now, but trust that it's the right thing and you
Yeah.
will find your way. That person would not have listened.
Because we know everything at 18, right?
Right?
We
I
got to
got a
fix it.
plan.
Yeah, exactly. I know what I'm doing. You
Exactly.
know? So at the end of the day, everyone has a perception of you. Family, friends, clients, everyone in your world sees
Mm.
you in a certain light. But you are the one that guides all of this. What's your perception of you?
I hope this is their perception of me because I try really hard to keep this going in my own world and life is I think that I am perceived as sort of eternally cheerful and optimistic, even in the darkest of circumstances. And I generally, I really try to maintain this positive habit of mind. And I mean, I'm not saying I don't, have a moment where I'm like, oh my God. But for the most part, I get my equilibrium very quickly and I start searching the horizon for opportunity. That's what I do. And even for my clients, it's just, I turn straight to, all right, this is the set of facts we have. Let's make the most of it. Let's find the hidden opportunity. I just don't see a lot of value in being a pessimist. So I think probably everyone who knows me through every single different interaction would call me, a cheerful optimist.
But the interesting thing about what you're saying that I've learned to embrace doing a lot of interviews with people that aren't musicians is that there's an entrepreneurial spirit that's not afraid of failure.
Yeah,
There's just not that fear. And if something doesn't work out right, it's kind of like those stories of people stuck on a desert island. Like who's going to freak out and who's not going to make it first? Who's
right,
going to kind of ride the middle and who's going to really excel? All of those attributes really come and boil to the surface when we are, put in those situations, you
right,
know. But at the
exactly.
but the bottom line is that the entrepreneurial spirit just doesn't have the fear. You're just going to do it. And if you fail, then you just figure it out.
Exactly. I mean, I think, you just have to know fear is wired into our brains and you don't have to take it so seriously. I mean, that's the way I look at it. And, I heard this great quote that I always turn to if I notice I'm getting, a little bit of that going, which is something like the bad news is we're all falling through the air. The good news is there's no ground.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
like we don't control very much. And
Yeah.
you know what? Just zoom out, notice how good most things really are going for you and get busy looking for opportunity because it's there. You've got to look for it. It's not going to knock you over the head.
Yeah. Sometimes I think about the visualization of Carl Sagan laying out the history of the universe and how absolutely infinitesimally small this epoch of time is.
Exactly. Well,
Not
and
to,
yeah, we're here for like a microsecond in the grand scheme of
I
humanity.
know.
Get over yourself.
Yeah. And that was the thing they were talking about is just our time period in this particular epoch of time, not to mention all of these other infinitesimal levels of time that were so grandiose. It's wild to think, but
Exit. It
it
is.
can ground you. It can humble you pretty quick.
I agree. I mean,
Yeah.
I completely agree. Zooming out and getting perspective immediately settles me down. And I think that's what I love about the mountains. I love, those kinds of landscapes. You just you remind yourself this thing's been here millions of years. I mean, I'm just
Yeah.
I'm a tiny little dot.
Uh-huh.
It's fine.
Absolutely. Yeah. So speaking of all of this magnanimousness that we're talking about, if you could get into a time machine and go back in time and see one event in human history, where are
Hmm.
you going? What would you love to see?
Wow. I don't know if this is an event, but I guess there's a time period I've always been intrigued by and a place. And I would think it was like New York City in the 1920s. That
Yeah.
seemed like a roaring wild old time full of expansive possibility
Uh-huh.
and fun and energy. I don't know. I've just always thought that would have been a wild, fun place to be.
I still have dreams where my ultimate dream, and I do have reoccurring dreams of just literally walking through New York with a good camera. That's it. Just,
Oh, yeah.
you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Just
Yep.
walk, capture, walk, just because there's something about, I just went to Universal Studios about 2 or 3 weeks ago in Orlando, and we
Yeah.
got in the New York section, and there was like all of these sets that were built up, and the actual Blues Brothers were playing and all of
Oh,
that.
my
And
gosh.
it was wild. And my wife was like, "Does this feel like it?" And I was like, "It's very strange. It does
Yeah.
feel like New York. Like
That's
there was,
wild.
it's totally weird how that
Yeah.
happens, you know." But so if anyone out there wants to get your book, they want to learn more, hire you, any of the good business, where's the best place to go?
Probably the single best place to go is I've got three websites, but the one you'll find me at pretty easily is Encoraco.com, Encoraco.com. And you can get my book there. You can learn about the coaching there. But my LinkedIn page as well would
Okay.
take you to any of these three avenues, including my law practice. So Yeah, I'm out there and always looking to connect with cool people. So,
Excellent.
yeah,
Speaking of, it's been great to connect with you, Elizabeth. Thank you for
thank
your
you.
story. Thank you for your time, and keep doing the wonderful work out there.
Yes, you too. I love your show and thanks again for having me on it. It's been a real pleasure.
Absolutely.